Welcome to this video recording of a new feature that I've been working on for Magium. Magium is a Selenium-based testing framework for people who really hate testing, which I am actually one of them. And so I built this out so that you could very easily build out batchable, executable functionality as you're working on building Selenium tests for your system. But the problem is, many people don't actually do Selenium tests because they're often fairly difficult to actually implement. Now, Magium goes a big step forward in terms of making it easier for you to build Selenium tests, but particularly for Magento, but also for other projects out there. But there's still sometimes, there's a bit of a learning curve that's actually associated with building out Magium tests as well. With that in mind, I've been working on a project here to try and help jumpstart Selenium testing in Magento. The project is based off of a larger initiative that I've been working on called Clairvoyant, which uses the Magium functionality to provide additional insights into how your site is actually working. Clairvoyant for Magento 1 is a Magento module that you install on your system and use it to build Magium tests directly in your Magento administrative UI. That means no coding and the capability to build out somewhat complex Magium tests without having to write a single line of code. You can download and install Clairvoyant directly off of the GitHub site by going to clone or download, or you can use Composer or Modman to install it. In this example, we're going to use Composer. So we'll go to our command line, and we'll go to a directory that has our project already in there. We have our composer.far file, and we have our Magento directory. If we look in the Magento directory, you'll see that it's basically a Magento directory. So the first thing we'll do is init the composer.json file. Go through some of the basic setup in case you're not used to doing it. Now there's one thing that we need to do in order to make this work properly with Magento without making any kind of configuration changes, and that is we need to change the Magento deploy strategy. This is not necessary, but if you don't do this, you need to go in and change a security setting in Magento. And since we don't want to do that, we'll just make the change here. And we'll call it Magento deploy strategy. We're going to say copy. By default, it'll do symlinks. Also, remember to put your comma there. Now, having done that, we'll install Clairvoyant. Acquire Magium, Magento 1, Clairvoyant UI. Now, we have Magento 1 in the name. Does that mean there's going to be a Magento 2? Yes, absolutely. But starting with Magento 1. Now we'll go through the installation process. If you don't have the Hackathon Composer installed, this will automatically install it for you. Now that it's installed, we need to configure the Composer installer. So we'll set the Magento root directory, which in my case is var www Magento. It'll patch the mage.php file if it was not already patched, and it was, so we're good to go here. So the first thing we need to do then is clear the cache. So I'm on a Docker container here, so I'll just, which everything runs as root. So we'll just var cache, and then go back to our Magento installation, reload it just to get the cache loaded up and nice and warm on the front page instead of the admin page. And then we'll go to our admin area, log in with our username and password. And now in our system directory, we should now have test configuration, test management, test execution, and the test queue. But before we go there, we're going to go to our configuration and take a look at what is there, because there's a couple things that we're going to need to change here. So we'll click on Magium. And we see that we have a couple of different settings that we can have here. We're going to change a few of them. We see here report to email addresses. There is a feature in Clairvoyant where you can send an email out to various recipients when various things happen, either on success, which means every time a test is run, failure only when tests are failed, or skipped, which includes both skipped and failed tests. Skipped tests, we'll see why that's important in a couple minutes here. Now, the Selenium URL is the URL to your Selenium instance. I have one here that is installed on my local instance, and it's up and running. You can find instructions on how to download and install and run Selenium out there on the web. So we're going to have to change the Selenium URL. Again, this is running on a Docker instance, so I'll have to put in my local host name. So it's 192.168.1.9. Now, you can also put in a log location. This log location is there if you need to diagnose any kind of problems that Magium is having running the Selenium tests. You'll have a fairly verbose log there. Now, the next one here is run test or use test run queue. Out of the box, Clairvoyant will only queue up items when they occur, and we'll see how we trigger that in a second. But normally it'll just queue up items, but we want to see some things here happening live, so we're not going to use the test run queue, so we're going to leave it as no. So what that's going to do is every time an event is triggered that we're listening to, it's going to run the test. Now, when this is set, we can also do something a little bit additional here. We can have it to throw an exception on failure. If we set this to yes, if an exception is thrown and you are within a transaction of an event that is occurring, it will actually cause the transaction to roll back. So, for example, if you're listening to a product save event, or you're observing a product save event, and you run the Selenium test, and there is some kind of an issue that occurs as a result of it, it'll throw an exception when this is set, and it'll roll back the transaction. So you do have that option there, but we'll just leave it as no here. Most of the time, you're not going to want to use this. And then get newsfeed. That's just a simple setting that will ping the Magium website for new news so that you can get this top area nice and populated with information. If it gets to be too verbose or you don't want to have that information there, you can just turn this off. It does it via a cron script, so you don't have to worry about extra lag when you log in. That's really annoying. Right now with it saved, we're going to go to our test configuration. Now, the first thing that's going to happen is it's going to scan for all the different components that can be used. Now, internally in Magium, there are a number of interfaces that are used to figure out what are the options that are available for individual assertions, actions, navigators, and things like that. And what this does then is it tries to find functionality that it can extract from Magium and inject into Clairvoyant, into this functionality here. We see here a couple of different options. These are the theme options that can be configured. These are Magium theme configurations that you can use to customize for your functionality on the site. So, for example, you have XPath here that if it's different to click on your home link, you can set that. If you're using some of the default product functionality, you can change that here if you have different products, which you probably do. If your product page add to cart XPath is different than normal, then you can change that here, and so on and so forth. You'll note here that we have these double curly braces here. In this scenario here, in the theme configuration, that means it's going to be run through the translator. So that it means you have internationalization built right into it. But on top of that, you can also make changes on the store view as well. If you do any kind of functionality that utilizes the administrative interface, you can change the username and the password here. If there's any kind of admin configuration, such as the URL for the admin UI, you can do that there. And if you have any default customer identity information that you want to use, you can specify that here. Now, this is all configurable. If you go to the config.xml file, you'll see a whole bunch of XML, wouldn't be Magento without XML, that allows you to figure out or provide additional customization if you want. This is just out of the box. You can add, can subtract, whatever you want to do. It doesn't matter to me. So, for example, we'll have the configuration, then we'll have a section, and we have defaults. We give it a label of store default. What type is it? Is it a theme? Is it a customer identity or things like that? Then we give another section saying the general site configuration, which if we go to base options, you'll see, or store defaults, you'll see general site configuration, base URL, home XPath, which map back to here. And this base URL, home XPath, if you were to go to the theme configuration for the Magento 1.9, you'll see home XPath, and what was the other one? The other one was base URL. So base URL, which is actually in, oh, there it is. So there's a one-to-one relationship that's set up. Now, at this point in time, anything that is structural, i.e. using arrays, is not supported, but there's no reason why that couldn't be added later on if people find this useful. So that is the default configuration for all the stores, or you can also change it again for an individual store so they can have differences in there. With that in mind, let's go now to our test management. Test management is basically where we create all of our tests. Now, there's a couple of things to note here. First of all, we have a new test here. There are no tests created. These tests will not be run unless they are associated with some kind of an action. So right now, we're just building a test, and we will call it simple product test. Now, we have a couple of preconditions here. This precondition is functionality that will be executed prior to the test itself to see whether or not this test should actually be run. As you'll note from the title here, we have it called simple product test. Now, the neat thing about preconditions is that they can actually extract data from the event that's being observed. Now, when we're looking at this, we have to bear in mind a couple of things. This is an integration in Magento, and it's an integration that occurs on the observer level, on the event level. And the way that is configured, we'll be seeing how this looks a little bit later on, but the way that is configured is under this execution, we have a list of event names that we are going to be able to observe. Now, just because we can observe an event does not mean we necessarily want to execute a test. For example, this is a test for a simple product. So, how do I make sure that when I save a configurable product that I don't have the same test being executed? Well, if we take a look at show instructions, we can see some examples of that. What this is going to do, and this is for the test in general, when an event is triggered and Clairvoyant is observing it, it will take a look at the event observer and it'll call the getData method to get a list of all the data that's available in that event. That event is then injected into the Magium dependency injection container, and it's injected with the name that the item has in the event. So when you save a product, there is a product in the event observer, and it's under the key product. And so what that means is that if you want to interpolate that data and include it in your test, you can do so by, again, using these curly brackets. So in this case, we see some examples here. If we want to get the type ID to only be simple, then we say the product of the type ID must equal simple. Or if we want it to be is saleable. So if we only want to run this test if the product itself can be sold, then we put that in there. It's basically two strings that are not delineated using quotes or anything like that, that are separated by some kind of an operator. And if you want the test to execute and you have preconditions, every single precondition must evaluate as true. So in this case, we're just going to do product get type ID equals simple. Again, it's intended to be very simple. We don't have a lot of interpolation going on there. You can do interpolation and do whatever, and it'll still work because the interpolation is based off of the double curly braces. But it's generally better to keep this stuff simple. So we'll close those instructions. Next up is a command open. This is basically an instruction that must occur for every test. So in this case, we'll call get product URL. And that needs to happen. Otherwise, it's not going to know where to go to actually execute the test. So we'll save the test and then start adding some instructions. In the instructions, we have different types. We have navigators, we have assertions, and we have actions. We're going to do just something simple here. We're going to assert that the product name is in the title, and then we'll just assert that we can add, or that we'll attempt to add the product to the cart. So we'll specify assertion, and as you can see, we have a fair number of assertions that we can choose from here. So we're going to do browser, title contains, and again, everything that is coming from the event is going to be injected into the dependency injection container, and when these instructions are rendered, it will render the injected content. So we'll do product get name and create instruction. Oops. Make sure that we get this right. Save the instruction. And we'll add another instruction, and we're going to choose an action this time. And since it's a simple product, we're going to add simple product to the cart. We'll save the test. Now, we want to look at this and we want to see, well, is this actually going to work, or do we need to go back and make changes? I don't want to just push this into production or assign it to a test and say, or assign it to an event and say, oh, hey, you should work. So we can test the execution as well. So by doing that, we can say we're going to add a test injection. And the first thing we do is we add an injection identifier. This is the key that you would have in the event. So normally for a product save, you have it being product. Then what we do is we provide the model group class name so that we can actually load up that item and inject it into the dependency injection container. So catalog product. And then 549 is the product that I typically use to do these kinds of tests. So, and you'd have to go to your product, you're browsing your product catalog and find the primary key in the URL. So we'll add the injection, and now, with a little bit of luck, we'll click execute test, and we should see a browser pop up and actually execute the test. And the test finished, and you can browse the log, and this test is basically now working. So hit cancel and save test, just to make sure we have it. Next up, we're going to go to our test execution. This is where we assign individual tests to individual events. Again, the events are completely configurable. You can do this here. You can create your own module that expands upon this, and it'll show up here using the XML configuration merging. And all you have to do to assign a test to a particular event is click on attach. Now, anytime a product is saved, this test will be executed. So let's go to our catalog, and we'll open it up in a new link here. And we're going to find a simple product that is visible. And we'll choose the Swiss Movement Sports Watch. Now remember, we turned off the queue, so this is going to run every time we save it. But when you're actually in production or wherever, you would want to use the queue so you're not incurring the save performance penalty. So we'll not make any changes, we'll just click save. We see that we're saving it, and it goes through the exact same thing that we saw earlier. Piece of cake, huh? Go to back, and we'll go to, this time we're going to look for a configurable product. Remember the precondition that we're looking for. We'll add the Ellis flat, and we'll click save here as well. Now we'll see the browser pop up, but it doesn't actually execute the test. And that's just simply the way the initialization works. That's why it pops up. So if we want to see what just happened, we can go to our test queue, and we see that we ran the simple product test. That was the event that was triggered. This is the URL that we opened. This was the precondition, and we see that the status here was skipped. We can click on View Log, and we can see all the things that occurred as they were executing. Or if it passed, we can click on View Log as well, and we can see everything that actually occurred there. So it gives you a lot of insight into what's going on. You can also then go to your temp and take a look at your Magium log. Oops. And you can see all the actual logging functionality that was executed, which is fairly similar to what we see here, though you see a lot of additional information in there. This is somewhat filtered. So with this, you can go in and you can add Magium tests with very little configuration. Sometimes when people are building out Selenium tests, there's this whole process that you need to go through in order to get to a product page, and URL or menu navigation is not an easy thing to script and things like that. But you can do some basic functionality here to execute Magium tests directly from within the Magento UI with very little technical knowledge. One thing I want to add before wrapping up here is in the test configuration, we also have this class search locations. If you add your own assertions, your own navigators, your own actions that you want to execute here, so perhaps the theme configuration doesn't allow for the type of functionality that you're looking for, and so you build your own little action, a little Magium action. What you can do here is you can add a class search locations like var www, Magento, app, code, local, your test namespace, module, and then maybe you have a test directory or something like that. And it'll search for in there to try and find classes that can be used for your Clairvoyant tests. So download it, install it, see what you think. It's not quite what we would call production ready, but it's pretty darn close. If you have any functionality, additional features that you would want, go to the Magium GitHub site, add issues, add new requests. Would love to hear from you. See if this is useful, how it can be useful, and anything else like that might be beneficial to you to help your organization be more responsive with building Magium-based Selenium tests. For more information, you can also go to magiumlib.com and get started from there. Happy testing.